Good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, to our MERICS media briefing on the forthcoming EU-China summit. I am Claudia Wessling, Director Communications and Publications here at MERICS, and I will lead you through this quick 1-hour session. We have two speakers here today, and let me briefly introduce them to you. Jeroen Groenewegen-Lau is a head of program of science, technology and innovation at MERICS. He has worked at China Policy, a Beijing-based research and advisory company, and spent over 10 years in China. Jeroen is the one focusing on everything science, technology and innovation here at MERICS. And we have Abigaël Vasselier with us. Abigaël is the Director Policy and European Affairs and Head of Program Foreign Relations at MERICS. And she has worked in Brussels as the Deputy Head of Division for China, Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan and Mongolia at the European External Action Service. And she is, of course, a close watcher of EU-China relations. Now, our topic today, on Thursday, as you all know, high-ranking politicians and diplomats from China and the European Union will gather for a summit meeting in Beijing. It's a one-day meeting, not 2 days as previously planned. And actually, there would be something to celebrate. This is the year that marks the 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations. However, we all know that relations are kind of tense at the moment. And our expert will, in the next minutes, lead you into the points of contention between the two sides and also tell you a little bit about what they expect from this very brief meeting in Beijing. Let me explain the structure of our brief meeting here today. So Abigaël and Jeroen will kick you off with short inputs. Abigaël focusing on the state of EU-China relations at the moment and her expectations towards the summit. Jeroen will focus on one topic that has been making headlines for a while now, the issue of rare earths and how China tries to leverage its strength in that realm to have a good negotiating position. After their inputs, you will have ample time to ask questions to our colleagues here. You can either use the raise hand function for that, or you can just write into the chat and I will pick your questions and read them to everyone. If you have technical problems, just flagging here, you can contact us in the chat as well. So, and that said, I think we can just get started, and I would like Abby to kick us off. Abigaël, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Claudia, and hi, everyone. I hope you have a good cup of coffee in front of you. You ask what we should expect. I think we should expect a very difficult moment and not a deal-making moment. And I'm going to run you through the reasons why. As Claudia said, it went from 2 days to 1, and there will be a meeting with Xi Jinping. There will be a meeting with Lijiang, which is the summit itself, and then a business summit co-chaired by Lijiang and President van der Leyen. The last summit, for recollection, was December 2023. So we had a different US administration. We had a different Taiwanese president. So basically, the odds were completely different, if you wanted it in short. What is at stake? I think trade is the top priority, and it is the top priority for both sides. The European Union has recorded a trade deficit last year of 304 billion euros, and this is linked to the Chinese industrial model partially, and barriers that the Chinese government is putting to European companies. So you have a list of issues that are structural, that are driving the agenda for Europe, and it goes from restriction to market access, to pressure stemming from overcapacity, to the topic that Jeroen is going to dive us into, which is the the export restrictions related to rare earths. And there are expectations from the European side that if China is serious in its relationship with the European Union, it can take some measures to address some of the economic imbalances. The question of of Chinese investment in Europe are also going to be at stake. And of course, so will be the list of irritants and barriers related to brandy, to dairy, and to pork that will be discussed. For China, equally, trade is a top priority. And the 2 points that China wants from Europe is that Europe remains open. And the biggest question for the Chinese side is, of course, the tariff on electric vehicle and second, access to European technology. And this means that the Chinese leadership will have one request for Europe, which is to stop using its toolbox related to basically recreating level playing fields. So Claudia would ask me, Abigaël, what does level playing field means? And it basically means to provide equal opportunities for European companies and Chinese companies in both markets. And because China does not do that, the European Union is using trade defensive measures and instruments to recreate that. So here we are talking about, for instance, the tariffs on electric vehicles, but also restrictions related to procurement on medical devices. The second topic is meant to be climate and environment. And here I think you had at some point in the preparation from both sides the expectation that this could be the good story. And we saw the Executive Vice President Ribera going to Beijing with 3 commissioners, which in terms of political capital from Europe is quite a lot, and coming back without a joint statement, and the 2 sides seem too far apart to actually have a joint statement. It does not mean that the conversations were not substantive. I think they were. If you read the joint communiques, there are areas of bilateral cooperation on climate and environment that we can discuss later that will continue, but the 2 sides are not going to agree on an ambitious roadmap when it comes to reducing carbon emission in the context of the COP30 and the nationally determined contributions. Foreign and security policy, and here we talk war in Ukraine. And we have moved from, I think, the past summit where the war in Ukraine and China's support to Russia war effort as the key framing for the relationship to almost a subtopic. And here I'm saying we have almost moved because I think the visit of Wang Yi changed quite dramatically the equation. It was thought as a topic almost part of foreign and security policy together with the South China Sea, for Europe together with Taiwan, not for China, of course. And now it seems to have moved back as a key topic. And the question of Taiwan, where with the new president in Taiwan in place, we can see increased tensions, and China is going to look after and is going to call for Europe to abide by the One China principle, and the European Union is likely to respond by the EU's commitment to its One China policy. This may do the trick one more time, but not for much longer. This summit is very different from previous ones. I started by saying in December 2023, the US administration was different. And of course, this changes a lot the framing of the topic. But first point is the preparations for the summit, leading to the summit, have been difficult. I think the Wang Yi meeting in Brussels have put back the question of China's support to Russia in the center of the discussion. I think his meeting with President van der Leyen confirmed that her tough stance on at the G7 was actually the way she would enter the summit meeting. The absence of high-level economic dialogue, despite a good level of interactions between Wang Wentao and Shevkovich, shows that we are far away from reaching an agreement on trade. And it also highlights, in my view, the limitation of dialogue when it comes to addressing structural issues in the bilateral relationship. And finally, the absence on joint statement on climate. I'm not going to go back to that. The second point is the first time that we are entering a summit with such tension in the relationship. China has created leverage over Europe, has gone into a tit-for-tat escalation with Europe, and has linked all issues. And you could almost say this looks like a Trump playbook used by China on Europe. And I think China has made the equation that this may work. My third point is, so if you walk into that summit with such a context, you can easily understand that there is a mismatch of expectation and there is a distance between the objectives of both sides. I think I looked back at what I wrote actually ahead of the summit in December 2023, and I remember starting a piece for MERICS by saying 2023, Europe is entering the summit in good faith. And that was what you heard, the term of good faith. I think this time Europe is entering with no illusion. And this is, I think, very different. Europe has no illusion that it's going to be a deal-making moment. They know it will not. And actually, it will not, because regardless, both Europe and China are sucked into the negotiations with the US. For Europe, what is at stake is the negotiations of a possible deal in the next few days. And what is at stake for China is the fragile truth that they have obtained in Geneva and London to see how this can hold. And at the moment, at that point in time, China view Europe as not willing to work together, as over-politicizing the question of China-Russia, and it means that there is no trust in China that Europe does want something. China, the Chinese leadership is quite concerned about what could be in the EU-US deal, in the sense that they are concerned that China could be a trade-off against US security guarantee and the US presence in the security architecture in Europe, while at the same time not denying that they are enjoying the fragile state of play of the transatlantic relationship, not to say the deep fracture, actually. Looking at what is next and what you should be looking in the next few days. First is, of course, where the negotiations between the EU and the US are leading to. And this could impact the way both the European side is entering the summit and the Chinese view on Europe. Second, and this is, I think, something to watch in the next 2 days, when in Brussels, Wang Yi said if there would be more sanction on Chinese entities in the context of the Russia sanction packages, there will be retaliation from China. And on the 18th of July, Europe finally passed and managed to find an agreement on the 18th sanction package, in which 2 Chinese banks are listed. So the question of whether or not China will retaliate on that front, I think, is still open. And finally, not to forget that before coming to China, there will be the EU-Japan summit. And depending on what the European and the Japanese leadership do agree, there may be some China component, and there may be a bit of anxiety in Beijing. Over the long term, it means that this summit is not going to change the course of Europe-China relations, which is one of deterioration due to structural issues. It means that Europe needs to be ready for a long-term struggle and probably need to rethink its China strategy at this stage.
Thank you, Abigail, for your first assessment. Actually, not very optimistic as regards the outcomes, some positive or collaborative outcomes of the summit. I would leave this for now and hand it directly to Jeroen, who will lead us through a few points regarding overcapacities issues, export controls, and all important topics that will probably be discussed at this summit. Jeroen, over to you. And
thank you.
This is a lot of information on the slide, so
yes.
I hope you can explain.
Yes, so thank you, Claudia, and thanks everyone for joining here. Good morning. Yes, I think the rare earth elements discussion has taken a lot of focus here, so I'll briefly highlight that and then maybe link up that discussion to a number of these other technology areas that we're also looking at closely. Yeah, I think this really fast-tracked when China announced that it would limit the export of 7 more rare earths in April. These are mostly, like I made a list here on the right with a quite detailed table that we can send to you also after the event, so that you can look at that in more, peruse that more slowly. These 7 materials that were added in April are used in a number of different industries. Defense, of course, is mentioned, but semiconductors and medical technology as well. But there are also, I guess, rare earths that are part of different materials that are used like across a whole range of sectors. They're not like restricted completely. Companies need to apply for a permit, and that requires them to hand over a lot of relatively sensitive information. And this setup enables China to kind of turn on the tap or slow down the tap and find reasons not to grant these export licenses in different in alignment with how the political relation with Europe also changes. And China, like I have this longer list here, it's much longer than 7 materials because I also want to show that this has been long in the making. China has kind of worked up its toolbox for the last couple of years, and we've seen gallium and germanium first being added in 23, and then that was expanded in 24, and then a number of other materials were also a part of that. And beyond the materials, there are also magnets and other kind of components that now require an export permit. So I think from the European side, what the best is that you can hope for is that China will have some kind of, realistically, that you can hope for is for China to Beijing to agree to expedite some of these permits to European companies, maybe especially those focusing on kind of new energy vehicles on areas where there are clearly non-civilian use, and that maybe some of the requirements for submitting all that detailed information might be kind of adjusted somewhat. I mean, this is the room of negotiation. And I think in that discussion, it's quite clear that Beijing will try to link this up with a number of other issues where China will seek to extract concessions from the EU at the summit. So we have energy vehicles. I already mentioned that. Claudia mentioned that in the introduction as well. Medical technology, I think that's an interesting one because China was, like Europe for the first time, used its international procurement instrument, and China kind of, rather than coming to negotiating table right away, issued its own set of responses restricting, I guess, or make it more difficult for European medical equipment makers to compete in government procurement in China. Semiconductor manufacturing equipment I mentioned here as well because the last couple of days we just seen the news that NVIDIA is allowed to sell H20 GPUs into China again, and the US kind of unilaterally, it seems, lifted some of its export controls on those chips which are used for to develop AI. So that's quite a big development that might also have some impact on how we think about exporting equipment made by ASML. So maybe we can discuss that later. I think research collaboration I have here because I think it's one of these areas where there could possibly, if both sides feel optimistic about talks, that there could be some agreement or at least some kind of statement that in principle both sides would support some kind of research collaboration. But I think that's quite tough. So all these things could be kind of become part of that mix. We'll have to look at exactly right how we want to blend these things together. If I go back to the rare earths, in the end, I would argue that for the European side, it's probably not kind of the best strategy to really kind of go into a tit for tat or a kind of trading off these different elements against each other, where you kind of negotiate access to rare earths at a temporal stage, and in exchange for reducing kind of tariffs on new energy vehicles, Chinese new energy vehicle exports to Europe. These topics are really quite separate, and we would argue that Europe shouldn't blink there, and really kind of trading off these things against each other would really set a poor precedent. I think especially with these areas where there's been a very thorough European investigation in the reasons why these we're in this situation now, and that we've established that there's been unfair subsidies and support in China, then it's quite difficult to, and we really shouldn't kind of roll back on that and say, well, actually, we don't find the issue very important or troubling. So, but I think this will be kind of a major part of the discussion. Yes, I think then really that, of course, this kind of larger, if this is the trend of discussions, that still leaves Europe in a quite difficult position with access to rare earths. It's not like we didn't see this coming. People have been saying this for quite a long time, but it's pretty difficult now to reduce those reliances. In that context, I think actually the EU-Japan summit is going to be quite interesting because Japan has had more kind of robust response to kind of reducing its reliance on Chinese exports in these rare earths. And yeah, a lot of these components are also considered in Europe. So it's mining, it's recycling, it's teaming up with other partners to secure supply chains that are, I guess, including like diversifying supply chains and including other producers in other parts of the world. And a lot of these things are also, of course, on the table in Europe, but they've just been much more forcibly kind of followed up on in the Japanese context. And so there's a lot of probably a lot of kind of next steps that we can see there and how that's working out. Of course, we should also say that in the case of Japan, it's not like they have solved this and they are not reliant in many of these areas. They also still need to export quite a bit or import quite a bit from China, which has, as you can see here in the table, established really impressive strongholds across the board in all these materials. So maybe the final point here is to, sorry, not end on an optimistic note, that on the rare earths, that this is kind of a long-term thing that will require quite a lot of effort on the European side going forward. I'll stop my input here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abigail and Jeroen, for your initial inputs. So we are looking at a summit that will be quite different from previous summits. We are not expecting great strides towards more collaboration with between China and the EU, and the rare earth issue really continues to be very important and pressing for the European Union, as you rightly just pointed out.